Why you wouldn't last a day in medieval times. Sleep story. Relax now. Feel your body settle into comfort. Take a deep breath in. And let it go. Slowly, gently, with no rush at all. As you breathe, imagine the faint glow of a fireplace before you. Sparks rise and fade. Soft orange light painting the walls. Outside, the night is quiet, hushed under a blanket of stars. Inside you are safe, calm, warm. This time is yours. Nothing to do. Nowhere to be. Just this moment, this story, and the soothing rhythm of your breath. Tonight I will take you back. Far back to the medieval world. But as you listen, you may discover why you would not last a single day in those harsh centuries. And at the same time, you may find comfort in how far the world has come. So, let yourself sink into the cushions, close your eyes if you wish, and let the story begin. Our story today begins in a small medieval village. Imagine it now. The air is crisp, carrying the smell of wood smoke and damp earth. The village is no more than a cluster of wooden huts, their thatched roofs sloping under the weight of dew. A dirt road winds through the center, uneven and muddy from yesterday's rain. Chickens cluck softly, a dog barks in the distance, and a rooster crows to announce the dawn. Inside one of those huts, a family begins to stir. Their bed is not like yours. Not soft, not layered with blankets. It is straw scattered on the floor, rough against the skin. The air is cold, your breath misting faintly in the dim morning light. There is no warm shower to greet you, no coffee to pour. Only a coarse piece of bread from yesterday, tough and hard, dipped into a bowl of thin broth to soften it. Hunger is not an exception here, it is the rule. Imagine yourself there, waking with them. The chill bites at your fingertips, and the taste of the bread is dry, bitter. Outside, work waits for you, stretching from dawn until dusk. Already you feel the weight of this life. The first challenge always is the cold. No central heating hums quietly in the walls. Instead, a fire pit in the center of the room smolders faintly, ashes glowing from the night before. If the fire died completely, the morning would be colder still. In winter, snow drifts against the doors, and icy winds slip through cracks in the wood. Families huddle close, sometimes even bringing their goats or chickens inside, just for the warmth of another living body. Clothing is simple, rough wool against the skin, often itchy and heavy. Boots are worn thin, sometimes patched with scraps of leather. Then comes the hunger. Grain is ground into dark, coarse bread, so heavy it sits like a stone in the stomach. When times are hard, the flour is mixed with beans, acorns, even sawdust, stretching it further but robbing it of nourishment. Fresh fruit, beer, sweetness, a dream, meat. Only if the village is celebrating a holy day, or if a hunt was successful. Your belly aches, even before the day has begun, and still you must work. The church bells ring. Their sound drifts across the village, echoing through the fields. They call not only for prayer but for labor. If you are a farmer, you rise to the fields. The soil is heavy, clinging to your boots. The plow is pulled not by machines, but by oxen or your own straining muscles. Every row, every seed depends on your hands. If you are a blacksmith, your forge is dark until you fan the coals into flame. The heat will scorch your face, your arms, as you hammer iron again and again, shaping tools, shaping weapons. If you are a servant in a manor, you rise even earlier, stoking fires, hauling water, sweeping rushes from stone floors. The nobles awake to your labor, while your own back aches before the sun is high. Children are no exception. They gather sticks for firewood, fetch water from the well, herd the goats or sheep along muddy paths. There is no school, no playtime, only duty. And so the day stretches on, long, heavy, relentless. As the sun climbs higher, shadows stretch across the fields. But danger is never far. War is always a possibility. Sometimes it is a quarrel between lords. Sometimes a rebellion. Sometimes simply pride. When armies march, villages tremble. Soldiers trample crops, seize food, burn homes. Families scatter, praying to escape the blade. Even in peace, danger lurks. Bandits prowl the forests, striking travelers, stealing coin, leaving bodies in the dust. And the law itself is merciless. A loaf of stolen bread may cost you your hand. A spoken insult may see you flogged in the square. Justice is swift, brutal, and public. Imagine walking alone down a dirt road at dusk. No lamps light your path. The air grows colder, the woods whisper around you. Each rustle, each crack of a twig makes your heart race. Is it a bandit, a wolf, or simply the wind? Your world is ruled not by safety, but by fear. And then sickness, perhaps the most cruel of all. A cut on your hand, from the plow or the forge, grows red, swells, and turns to fever. There are no antibiotics, no doctors as you know them. Only herbs, prayers, and hope. Childbirth is perilous. Women whisper prayers as mothers bring forth life, knowing death is often close at hand. And when plague comes, it spares no one. The Black Death, dark and merciless, sweeps through towns, through cities, through villages. Families die together, homes abandoned, streets silent except for the toll of the dead cart bell. People do not know of germs or infection. They speak of curses, of foul air, of angry stars. They close their doors, pray for deliverance, and wait in terror. Even without plague, fevers, smallpox, and leprosy scar the land. Many lives are short, 30-40 years at most. Few grow old. But through it all, one constant remains, the church. The bells call at dawn, at noon, at dusk. The priest preaches of heaven and hell, of salvation and sin. Faith is comfort but also fear. Superstitions fill the empty spaces of knowledge. A comet in the sky is a sign of doom. A sick cow is blamed on a curse. A child's laughter at night may be called the trick of spirits. Science is yet unborn. Instead, mystery and dread weave through every unexplained moment. And now, as the fire crackles gently in your imagination, as the soft glow of this medieval world flickers before you, let your body relax deeper still. The medieval day is hard, cold, and heavy. But here in this safe place you only need to listen. Only need to drift. Only need to rest. Breathe deeply, slowly, gently. And when you are ready, we will continue this journey through the medieval world. Take a slow, steady breath in, and let it drift out like a soft breeze across the night fields. Imagine the fire still before you. The wood shifts, sparks dance and fade, and the warmth touches your skin. Outside, a gentle wind stirs the leaves, whispering through the branches. The medieval world surrounds you now. Its sounds, its smells, its shadows. Our story continues. You might believe nobility was a life of comfort. Golden chalices, feasts of roasted meats, gowns of silk. And yes, there were riches, but also burdens heavier than armor. Castles, the symbols of power, were not warm and welcoming. Imagine cold stone walls, damp with moisture, drafty halls where winds whistled through arrow slits. Torches smoked, filling the air with a haze. Fires roared in great hearths, but heat never reached the corners of those vast chambers. Marriages were arranged like treaties, weaving webs of alliances. A daughter might be promised to a man she had never met, sent away at 12 or 13 to a distant land. Her duty not to her heart, but to her family's ambition. Lords bore their own weight. A careless word, a whisper of betrayal, and daggers could appear in the night. Power attracted envy, and envy often ended in blood. Knights, bound by vows of chivalry, trained from boyhood. The clatter of swords on shields echoed in the courtyards, the grind of whetstones sharpening blades into cruel edges. Yet even knights knew fear. Armor was heavy, suffocating, and on the battlefield, courage often met the mud and silence of death. Imagine the banquet halls filled with laughter and music, yet beneath every smile lay secrets, plots, and hidden blades. Nobility was not freedom. It was a crown of iron pressing heavily on the brow. And yet, In the shadows of hardship, stories bloomed. Picture villagers huddled around the hearth on a winter's night, the wind howling outside, flames casting tall, shifting figures on the walls. A storyteller begins, his voice low, steady, drawing every ear closer. He speaks of Arthur and his knights of the Round Table, brave men who fought for honor, who quested for the Holy Grail. He speaks of maidens fair and dragons fierce, of battles fought not with plows but with shining swords. Children stare wide-eyed, elders nod knowingly, for legends hold a truth deeper than fact. They give meaning to suffering. There are whispers of saints who performed miracles, of relics that glowed with divine light. Pilgrims journeyed for months, even years, to touch a splinter said to be from the cross, or a vial said to hold a drop of holy blood. And there were darker tales, of witches in the woods, of curses etched in bone, of spirits wandering by moonlight. Every unexplained sickness, every sudden storm was folded into a story, embroidered with fear, until legend and life blurred together. The medieval world was hard, but it was also alive with wonder, mystery, and belief. Now, let us walk slowly, gently, through a medieval village at dusk. The sky glows with fading gold as the sun dips low. Smoke rises from chimneys, carrying the smell of stew, thick with cabbage and onions. Chickens flutter into coops. Goats bleat softly as they are led inside. The road is dirt, rutted with cart tracks. A blacksmith hammers at his forge, sparks scattering like fireflies. A baker pulls loaves from the oven, their crusts blackened, their smell filling the air with comfort. Children chase each other, bare feet kicking up dust, laughter echoing briefly before mothers call them inside. Dogs bark, a cow lows in the distance, and bells toll from the church steeple, marking the hour of evening prayer. As you walk, the villagers glance at you with tired but kind eyes. Their faces are lined, weathered by sun and toil, but they smile as they pass. For in this world, community is survival, and every face is known. Yet beyond the village, shadows deepen. The forest looms, dark and endless, its secrets untold. Few dare to wander there at night. And so we return to the question, could you last a day in medieval times? Perhaps not. The cold would bite. The hunger would ache. The labor would break your back. The fear would tighten your chest. But the people of that age endured. They rose each day despite the frost. They laughed despite the hunger. They built, prayed, fought, and dreamed, weaving lives from hardship. Their strength was not born of choice, but of necessity. They had no other world, no escape, no soft pillow to fall back on. And so they endured generation after generation, until centuries passed and the world slowly, painfully, became the one we know today. As you breathe now, think of that strength. Not to envy it, but to honor it. To recognize the endurance that shaped history, and to let it remind you of the comfort you hold in this moment. Bell drifting deeper. Now let the fire fade in your imagination. The crackle grows softer, the light dimmer, until only embers glow. Outside, stars scatter across the sky, ancient and steady. A soft breeze rustles the leaves. The night deepens. Feel your breath slowing, your body heavier, your thoughts quieter. The medieval world may have been harsh, but here tonight you are safe. You are warm. You are at peace. And as you drift, the story will wait. The bells will toll, the fires will burn, and the legends will whisper, until you are ready to return. Sleep now if you wish, or listen further if you are still awake. Imagine for a moment that the sun has just risen over a medieval village. The light filters through a soft morning mist, illuminating wooden cottages, narrow dirt paths, and the smoke that curls from simple chimneys. At first glance, the scene may appear almost charming, but let us look closer. The morning air is not filled with the fragrance of flowers or fresh bread, but with the sharp scent of livestock, human waste, and smoke from damp wood. The streets are muddy, littered with straw and refuse, and there are no drains to carry away the filth. To simply walk through the village without soiling your feet would already be a challenge. For breakfast, there is no coffee, no tea, and certainly no warm pastries. Instead, a thin broth or a hunk of stale bread must suffice. Ale or watered-down beer is often drunk, even in the morning, because clean water is rare and often dangerous to consume. If you were used to the comforts of a modern kitchen, you would already feel out of place. Now consider your clothing. Wool is coarse and heavy, and linen, when available, is rough against the skin. There is no soft cotton, no comfortable stitching, no convenient buttons or zippers. Everything is tied with cords or fastened with crude clasps. Shoes are simple leather, often stiff and uncomfortable. By mid-morning, the weight of your garments alone might exhaust you. And yet, the day has only just begun. Work is constant and unrelenting. If you are a peasant, you rise with the sun to labor in the fields, bending your back under the weight of tools as you sow, reap, or dig in the hard soil. If you are a craftsman, your hands are raw from hammering, carving, or shaping without the aid of modern machines. And if you are among the nobility, your life is not one of leisure but of constant responsibility. Managing lands, collecting taxes, dealing with disputes, and preparing for war. Food is scarce. The diet is repetitive. Salted pork, coarse bread, cabbage stew. Meat is rare and precious. Fresh fruit is a luxury. Winters are especially cruel, with many surviving on little more than turnips and whatever grain has not spoiled. Malnutrition is common, and hunger gnaws at the belly like an unwelcome companion. And as the day stretches on, you would soon encounter one of the greatest enemies of medieval life: disease. Without proper medicine, even a small cut can fester into a deadly infection. Fleas and lice are constant, clinging to skin and clothing. The dreaded plague, when it arrives, sweeps through villages without mercy, taking the young, the old, and the strong alike. By evening, as the sun sinks beyond the horizon, the world does not grow safer. Darkness brings fear. There are no street lamps, no comforting glow of electricity, only the faint flicker of a torch or candle. Outside the walls of the village, wolves prowl, bandits roam, and unseen dangers lurk in the night. You would sleep lightly, if at all, knowing that safety is fragile and fleeting. And yet, despite the hardship, life moves forward. The bells of the church call the faithful to prayer. Children laugh as they chase one another in the dust. A minstrel sings a song of forgotten heroes. For them, this is simply life. For you, accustomed to modern comforts, it would be unbearable. This is why you would not last a day in medieval times. Not because you are weak, but because the world was harsher, the nights were darker, and survival was a daily battle. So rest easy tonight, in the warmth of your bed, with clean water by your side and gentle comfort all around. For though the past holds endless stories and lessons, your place is here, in the present, where you are safe. As we continue our quiet journey into the medieval world, let us pause to reflect on one of its greatest trials: the struggle against sickness. If you were to fall ill in those times, there were no hospitals as you know them today. No antibiotics, no sterile instruments, no comforting pharmacies with rows of remedies. Instead, healing was guided by superstition, tradition, and fragments of ancient knowledge. Doctors spoke of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. They believed that illness came when these humors were out of balance. The solution: bleeding a patient with leeches or draining blood through cuts, in hopes of restoring harmony. Imagine lying feverish on a rough straw mattress, while a physician in long robes and a mask filled with herbs leans over you. He cannot name the bacteria or the virus. He only knows to recite prayers, prescribe bitter herbs, or place charms to ward off evil spirits. Sometimes the cure was worse than the illness itself. And when plagues swept through villages, there was little anyone could do. Entire families vanished in days, and fear filled the air heavier than smoke. People whispered that it was God's punishment, or perhaps the work of witches. In such a world, even survival was uncertain. But if disease did not claim you, the laws of the land might. Justice in the medieval era was not gentle. Punishments were often harsh, public, and meant to instill fear. A thief might lose a hand. A liar might be branded. A traitor could face the stocks, where humiliation lasted for days under the eyes of the crowd. More severe crimes, rebellion, witchcraft, heresy, led to punishments too grim to linger on in detail. Torture chambers, with their chilling devices of rope, wheel, and rack, were not tales of imagination, but very real tools of authority. Even minor disputes could lead to violent consequences, for laws were sharp-edged and mercy was rare. And then, of course, there was war, a constant shadow over the medieval landscape. Kings and lords waged endless battles to claim land, wealth, or honor. To march into war meant long weeks of hunger, mud, and exhaustion. Armies moved slowly, burdened with supplies, and fought with brutal simplicity. Swords, axes, arrows, and fire. A knight in shining armor may seem noble in legend, but imagine the weight of his steel, pressing on shoulders, chest, and limbs until breath itself became difficult. Horses carried the charge, banners waved, and trumpets called. But when the clash came, it was chaos. The noise of steel striking steel, the cries of men, the thud of arrows. It was a storm of terror. And in the midst of it, survival was slim. For peasants drawn into battle, the end was often swifter. With little armor and crude weapons, they faced death as pawns in a greater game. Even victory brought no peace. Only ashes, burned fields, and mourning. This too is why you would not last a day in medieval times. Medicine offered little safety. Laws were edged with cruelty. And war was an ever-present threat. So tonight, as you rest in warmth and silence, think of how far the world has come. The clean bandage, the fair trial, the armistice and peace. These are blessings hard-won by centuries of struggle. Let the fire crackle softly beside you, as the past fades into a dream. Close your eyes now. Breathe deeply. And let your mind wander back into that distant age, where each sunrise began with the tolling of church bells. Religion was not just a part of life, it was life itself. Every hour of the day was measured not by clocks, but by prayer. Dawn, noon, dusk, all announced by the ringing that echoed across villages and valleys. The church stood at the center of every town, not only as a place of worship, but as a place of judgment, learning, and refuge. Yet with faith came fear. The people of the Middle Ages believed deeply in heaven and hell, salvation and damnation. Priests reminded them constantly that every thought, every act would be weighed. To disobey the church was not just rebellion, it was to risk the eternal fires of the afterlife. Imagine living each day beneath that heavy reminder, where even misfortune was seen as a divine warning. But where knowledge faltered, superstition grew. A black cat crossing your path might be seen as a curse. Strange lights in the night sky were omens. A poor harvest could be blamed on witches, or on sins left unconfessed. Amulets, charms, and whispered spells were kept close, hidden in pockets or tied around necks, believed to guard against evil. Daily survival was a ritual of its own. Water was fetched from wells, often carried in wooden buckets balanced on tired shoulders. Food was scarce, so meals were simple and repetitive. Coarse bread, porridge, sometimes salted fish or dried meat. Cleanliness was rare. Baths were luxuries, and more often, people relied on scented herbs or smoke to mask the odors of toil. Nights were their own challenge. With no lamps to brighten the dark, the world outside became a mystery once the sun set. Shadows stretched long, forests whispered, and wolves howled at the edges of farmland. People huddled close to hearth fires, telling stories to pass the hours until dawn returned with safety. Superstition shaped every act of protection. A sprig of rosemary above a doorway, a cross carved into wood, a whispered prayer before traveling roads at night. These were their defenses against what they could not explain. And through it all, the rhythm of the seasons ruled their lives. Spring for planting, summer for labor, autumn for harvest, and winter for endurance. Each cycle a reminder that survival was never guaranteed, but always fought for. So imagine yourself in that world, waking not to alarms but to bells and prayers, carrying water before the sun grows hot, eating bread baked in dark ovens, kneeling in churches heavy with candle smoke, and whispering charms as the night draws close. It was a life bound tightly by faith, shadowed by superstition, and anchored in rituals of survival, beautiful in its way, but fragile and endlessly demanding. And here, in the quiet of your room, you may find a small gratitude for the safety you now hold. Clean water, warm food, the hum of electricity, and the peace of knowing the night is no longer filled with wolves. The medieval world drifts around you like a dream that you do not have to live. Now, as you lie back, let your breathing slow, and imagine a distant silhouette rising on a hill. Fortress of stone, castle. It is not the fairy tale palace of shining spires you may imagine. No, castles in the Middle Ages were strongholds, built for defense, not for comfort. Their walls were thick and damp, their windows narrow slits, their chambers cold even in summer. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of smoke, sweat, and stone. Nobility lived here, lords and ladies, heirs and daughters, knights and retainers. You might think such a life was filled with luxury, but comfort was scarce, even within these mighty walls. Meals were richer, yes, roasted meats, sweet wines, and spiced dishes that peasants could never afford. But behind the banquets lay constant tension. Every meal could be poisoned, every servant could betray, and every guest could be plotting an alliance that would shift the balance of power. Nobility carried the burden of rule. A lord was responsible for every soul on his land. The crops, the taxes, the defense against raids. Failure in any could mean ruin. Castles were not only homes, they were command centers, where decisions could save lives, or destroy them. Knights trained in the courtyards, their swords clashing with the dull clang of steel. Pages and squires tended to armor so heavy that once worn, it could crush an untrained man. War was not an abstraction here, it was a certainty. If you were noble, you were expected to defend your title, to lead men into battle, and to protect your lineage no matter the cost. And for the ladies of the castle, life was no less demanding. Their marriages were rarely for love, but for strategy. Unions forged to gain land, strengthen alliances, or end disputes. A young girl might be promised in marriage before she had even reached her teens. Her future sealed not by her desires, but by her family's ambition. Within the stone halls, intrigue ran thick as winter fog. Whispers of betrayal, conspiracies for power, alliances made and broken. To survive, nobility needed not only strength of arms, but cunning, patience, and unshakable will. Even within these walls, life was fragile. A single siege could starve a castle into surrender. Months of arrows raining, stones from catapults, and fire thrown over the walls. Imagine the endless nights of fear, waiting to hear the crash of gates, the breach of walls, the enemy storming in. So yes, nobility meant privilege, but it also meant peril. Every crown was heavy, every title was a risk, every alliance was a gamble. And as you picture yourself walking the drafty halls of a castle, hearing the echo of boots on stone, the rustle of banners above, the watchman calling from the towers, you may realize that the life of a lord or lady was not ease, but endless endurance. A burden wrapped in velvet and iron. A life where power was both shield and prison. Now, let the castle fade from your mind. The torches dim, the halls grow still, and you drift safely back to your quiet place, far from those cold stone walls. Now, take a slow, gentle breath, and imagine the sound of drums in the distance. The earth trembles faintly beneath your feet. A banner rises on the horizon, painted with the colors of a noble house. The medieval world was built on war, and war was never far away. Knights, the armored warriors of their age, stood at the heart of this violence. From childhood, a boy destined for knighthood began his training as a page, then a squire. He learned to polish armor until it gleamed, to tend to horses with care, to wield swords and lances until his arms ached. Day after day, bruises and sweat hardened him, shaping him into a living weapon for his lord. The armor itself was no simple costume. A full suit of plate could weigh up to 60 pounds, crushing for the untrained. Once mounted on a warhorse, however, a knight became a moving fortress, steel glinting in the sun, lance couched and ready. Imagine the thunder of hooves across a battlefield, hundreds of horses charging, earth shaking, air splitting with cries of war. But glory, as the songs described, was rare. Battle was chaos. The clash of steel against steel, the screams of the wounded, the stench of blood and mud. It was a nightmare in daylight. An arrow could find the smallest gap in armor. A sword could crush even when it failed to cut. Horses fell, crushing their riders. Sieges were even worse. Imagine standing behind castle walls as enemy catapults hurled stones, splintering towers and gates. Fires raged, smoke filled the lungs, supplies dwindled. Weeks of hunger gnawed at defenders until surrender or death seemed the only choices. And when the walls finally fell, there was no mercy. Villages burned. Looting, pillaging, and slaughter followed. For in war, chivalry often bent beneath the weight of desperation and rage. For common soldiers, war meant even harsher fates. They fought with simple spears or axes, with little armor beyond a padded tunic. Many never returned. Their reward was not glory, but survival, and perhaps a share of plunder if luck favored them. To live as a knight was to live for war, but also for duty. They swore oaths to their lords, and breaking those oaths meant disgrace worse than death. Yet in truth, knights were human, torn between ideals of honor and the brutal needs of survival. Picture yourself, just for a moment, standing on that field, mud sucking at your boots, the weight of a sword dragging your arm, your breath hot inside a helmet. The roar of enemies surrounds you, the air thick with smoke and fear. Could you lift your weapon again and again, knowing each moment could be your last? War was not a chapter in medieval life. It was the rhythm of it. Lords gained power through it, peasants suffered under it, and knights were consumed by it. So when you dream of banners and shining swords, remember, behind the romance was a world of endless struggle, where survival was uncertain and peace was fleeting. Now, let the battlefield fade from your mind. The cries of war grow distant. The clash of steel melts into silence. You are safe again, resting, breathing, calm. Now, let your shoulders relax. Feel the softness of the pillow beneath your head. With each breath, imagine yourself walking through a medieval village, where smoke curls from chimneys and the sound of children's laughter mingles with the bleating of goats. Here, family was the center of life. But family life was a burden as much as it was a comfort. For women, survival carried its own harsh rules. From girlhood, most were expected to marry, not for love, but for survival and alliance. A young bride might be barely into her teens, handed to a husband chosen by her family. Her worth was measured in dowry and fertility. Childbearing was constant and dangerous. Without modern medicine, childbirth often claimed the lives of mothers and infants alike. Imagine the courage it took. Every pregnancy a gamble, every labor a brush with death. Yet women endured, for children meant both hope and survival. Daily life was no less demanding. Noblewomen managed vast households, overseeing servants, food stores, and the endless tasks of keeping a castle or manor running. Peasant women worked beside men in the fields, bent over rows of grain, tending animals, carrying water for miles. At dawn, they baked coarse bread over open hearths. At dusk, they stitched clothes by candlelight, their hands raw from labor. But women's roles stretched beyond toil. They were keepers of knowledge, herbs for healing, songs for comfort, stories whispered by firelight to calm frightened children. In times of war, they defended homes, managed estates in their husband's absence, and sometimes, in rare but fierce moments, took up arms themselves. Family bonds were both fragile and fierce. Children were expected to work from an early age, learning trades, gathering wood, or guarding flocks. Life was communal. Grandparents, cousins, and neighbors all intertwined in survival. A loaf of bread might be shared among many mouths, every crumb precious. And yet, even amid hardship, there was joy. Festivals filled villages with music and dance. Weddings brought laughter and feasts. Mothers sang lullabies, fathers told tales, children played simple games in the dirt. Love existed, even in a world where it was rarely the reason for marriage. But imagine for yourself. Could you live in such a world? Could you endure the endless cycle of chores without pause? The constant fear of sickness? The knowledge that safety was never certain? Could you carry water until your arms ached, knead bread in smoke-filled rooms, and sleep lightly, always aware of hunger or danger? For the women and families of the medieval world, strength was quiet, uncelebrated, but immense. Their resilience built the fabric of society, even if history rarely gave them glory. And now, as the village fades from your imagination, let the sound of a gentle breeze replace the echo of footsteps on dirt roads. You are safe here. You are warm. You are at rest. Take a slow breath. Let your chest rise and fall easily. And picture a narrow dirt road winding out of a medieval village. The air smells of damp earth and wood smoke. A cart creaks slowly forward, pulled by tired oxen, its wheels sinking into mud. Beside it, a merchant walks, his cloak pulled tight against the wind. Travel in the Middle Ages was no light undertaking. Today, a journey of a few hours by car would have taken days, sometimes weeks, on foot or horseback. Roads were rough, often nothing more than paths carved by repeated footsteps. In rain, they turned to rivers of mud. In winter, they froze solid. Bridges were scarce, so travelers waded through icy streams or crossed on shaky wooden planks. And danger was everywhere. Bandits haunted forests and valleys, waiting to strike. With no police to call, a lone merchant might vanish without a trace. Even honest travelers could be mistaken for spies or thieves, and justice was harsh for those in the wrong place at the wrong time. Trade, however, was the lifeblood of the medieval world. Markets bustled with energy, the heart of every town. Imagine bright fabrics from distant lands, spices like cinnamon and saffron that carried the scent of worlds beyond. Coins clinked, bargains were shouted, and travelers exchanged not just goods but stories. For merchants, the road meant fortune or ruin. A successful journey could enrich a family, but one storm, one ambush, one broken wheel could mean disaster. Caravans sometimes banded together, strength in numbers, their wagons forming a moving village across the countryside. Pilgrims, too, traveled these same roads, poor and rich alike, walking miles upon miles to holy shrines, carrying faith as their shield against fatigue and fear. Imagine yourself on such a road. The sun dips low, shadows stretch long, and the sound of hooves echoes behind you. Is it a friendly traveler, or a robber waiting to strike? You quicken your pace, clutching the little food you carry, hoping the night passes safely. Inns were rare and often costly. Many travelers slept in barns, under trees, or huddled against stone walls for shelter. A warm bed, if found, was shared with fleas and strangers alike. The journey was not about comfort. It was about endurance. And yet, without these roads, without the merchants and pilgrims and wanderers, medieval life would have stagnated. Through danger and hardship, ideas spread, cultures mingled, and horizons expanded. But could you walk for days in ragged shoes, eat nothing but stale bread and thin broth, never certain if you'd arrive at your destination? Could you sleep lightly, fearing the crack of twigs in the darkness? Most of us today, used to smooth roads and safety, would find such a journey unbearable. Now, let the creaking cart fade from your mind, the road dissolving into silence. Let the weight of travel lift from your shoulders. You are still calm and safe where you are. Close your eyes a moment, and imagine a flicker of candlelight upon painted walls. The world of the Middle Ages was often dark, cold, and uncertain. But within that darkness, people found ways to create beauty that still whispers to us today. Art was devotion. The frescoes and stained glass of cathedrals were not simply decorations. They were stories written in color and light. To a villager who could not read, a window glowing with blues and reds told of heaven, of saints, of eternity. The glass shimmered as the sun passed, as though God himself were painting upon stone. Illuminated manuscripts held another kind of wonder. Picture a monk bent over parchment, dipping his quill into gold leaf, shaping delicate vines and bright flowers around each letter. Hours, even days, spent on a single page. Books were treasures, far beyond the reach of ordinary folk. To hold one was to hold the weight of years of patience and prayer. And music, the music. It was not the symphonies you know today, but simple chants, lutes, and voices weaving together in the air of stone chapels. Imagine monks singing in the stillness before dawn, their notes rising and falling like waves upon an unseen sea. Or in a village square, a fiddler playing as peasants stamped their feet, hands clasped, spinning in circles under the pale moon. These moments of joy were brief, and perhaps that was why they shone so brightly. Life was harsh. Famine, plague, and war pressed upon every corner. But for an evening, a wedding, a feast, or a festival, the world could be filled with laughter. A garland of flowers on a young girl's hair, the rhythm of drums echoing across fields, children chasing each other in games that seemed to banish hunger for a while. Even the nobility found their escapes. In castles, troubadours sang of knights and impossible loves. Great banquets offered roasted meats, sweetmeats, and spiced wine, their halls alive with music and jesters. For a night, the cold stone walls became warm with laughter and light. But remember, these were only moments. The morning always returned. The lute was put away, the paintbrush set aside, the feast cleared, and life once more became toil and survival. That is perhaps why medieval joy feels so precious, even to us now. It was rare and it was fragile. Could you live like this? Could you cling to a brief song in the square as your only comfort? Could you wait months, even years, for a festival just to laugh and dance once again? For most of us today, used to constant entertainment, the silence between joys would feel unbearable. Now let the faint sound of a lute fade into nothing. The painted glass dissolves, the voices fall still, and you are left with quiet, calm, and rest. Imagine falling ill in the Middle Ages. A cough that lingers, a wound that refuses to heal, or a fever that burns through the night. There were no hospitals as you know them now, no reliable medicine, no sterile rooms filled with clean instruments. Illness in those centuries was often a sentence, not a condition. Doctors, if you were wealthy enough to summon one, believed in the balance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too much of one, they thought, caused sickness. Their cure: to bleed you, sometimes until weakness itself became more dangerous than the illness. Imagine lying there, pale and trembling, as a physician pressed leeches to your skin or cut open your vein with a cold blade. If you were poor, you might seek out a village healer, a woman with herbs gathered from fields and forests. She might brew teas of chamomile for fevers or press poultices of garlic upon wounds. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it did not. And if the sickness spread, whispers of witchcraft could follow her. Superstition bled into medicine everywhere. A toothache might be treated by wearing a charm carved from bone. Epilepsy was thought to be the touch of demons, cured only by prayer, fasting, or holy water sprinkled upon the sufferer's brow. Plague, when it swept through, was blamed on bad air, the alignment of the planets, or the wrath of God himself. And so people turned to rituals. Processions of barefoot penitents wound through the streets, chanting and flogging their own backs to beg for mercy. Amulets were strung around children's necks. Doors were marked with herbs or symbols meant to keep death away. Yet death still came. In war, wounds were as deadly as swords. A cut from a rusty blade could fester, swelling with infection. Soldiers prayed their injuries were clean enough to heal. Many did not survive the fever that followed even a small scratch. The simplest accident, a fall, a broken bone, could spiral into the end of a life. Life expectancy was short. The body was fragile. And for all the faith in prayers and potions, survival was often a matter of luck. To live through childhood was a triumph. To reach old age, a rarity. Could you endure such fragility? Could you face each cough or ache with the fear it might be your last? Could you live in a world where superstition and desperation replaced science? As the candle burns low, you may feel a quiet gratitude. Tonight, your breath comes easy, your body rests, and the shadows of medieval sickness fade away. Picture yourself accused of a crime in the Middle Ages. Perhaps someone swore they saw you steal a loaf of bread. Perhaps a neighbor whispered you practiced witchcraft. Guilt or innocence mattered less than status, reputation, and luck. Courts were not places of calm fairness, but of spectacle. Trials could be brief, with little chance to defend yourself. If you were poor, your voice carried little weight. If noble, your title might shield you. Justice tilted always toward power. But there were tests. Trials by ordeal were believed to let God reveal the truth. A hot iron placed in your hand. If your burn healed cleanly, you were innocent. Or you might be thrown into water. If you floated, you were guilty, for the pure water rejected you. If you sank, you were innocent, though many drowned before that truth could save them. Punishments were harsh, meant to be warnings to all who watched. A thief might lose a hand. A liar could be branded with hot iron. Stocks in the town square exposed criminals to ridicule, spittle, and stones from neighbors. Executions were public. Beheadings, hangings, burnings, all staged as grim theater. Children stood in the crowd, watching, learning what happened to those who disobeyed. Even small offenses could mean suffering. A peasant unable to pay taxes might have his land seized. A woman accused of gossip might wear an iron bridle that locked her tongue. Justice was not about rehabilitation but control and fear. For nobles, the burden was different. Their disputes were often settled with duels. Honor judged by the sword. A knight who lost his trial by combat lost not just his case, but his life. Even lords lived under the looming threat of rebellion, treason, or the king's disfavor. Punishments far more brutal than any village thief might face. Superstition mingled with law. Accusations of witchcraft or heresy spread like wildfire. To question the church was to risk fire at the stake. Torture was seen as a tool of truth. Stretching, crushing, burning, until confession spilled forth, whether true or not. Imagine living under such a shadow. Every word weighed, every glance measured. Could you survive knowing that a whisper against you, a grudge from a neighbor, a bad harvest blamed on your presence, might end with rope, fire, or blade? And yet, for those people it was life. They endured, obeyed, and prayed for mercy. You today might not last a day in such a world of fear and iron judgment. Close your eyes, and picture yourself walking through the narrow, twisting lanes of a medieval town. The houses lean toward each other, timber frames darkened with smoke, upper floors jutting out so close they nearly touch. The streets are unpaved, muddy, and crowded with chickens, dogs, and carts creaking under the weight of goods. The air is thick with the scent of bread baking, ale brewing, sweat, smoke, and sewage flowing through open drains. At the center of this maze lies the heart of medieval life, the market square. Here, merchants spread their wares. Bolts of brightly dyed cloth, baskets of onions and garlic, honeycombs dripping with sweetness, smoked fish, and the rare gleam of imported spices like cinnamon or pepper. The noise is constant. Vendors shouting prices, children laughing, a town crier announcing new taxes or royal decrees. Money was scarce, so barter was common. A farmer might trade a sack of grain for a pair of leather shoes. Coins, when exchanged, clinked like tiny treasures. For many villagers, market day was the highlight of the week. A chance not only to buy and sell but to hear news, share gossip, and catch glimpses of performers, jugglers, or traveling musicians. But survival was always fragile. Food spoiled quickly, and hunger was never far away. Bread, ale, and pottage, a thick stew of vegetables and grains, formed the diet of most families. Meat was rare, unless one was wealthy or it was a festival day. Fresh fruit was seasonal, and famine always lurked in the shadows of failed harvests. Illness spread quickly in these crowded towns. A single spark of plague could turn the lively market into a place of mourning. With no sewer systems, Filth gathered in the streets, and rats thrived. Doctors were scarce and costly, so most people relied on herbs, charms, and prayer. For craftsmen, life revolved around guilds. Blacksmiths, weavers, bakers, all belonged to these associations that controlled prices, trained apprentices, and set the standards for their trade. To join a guild was to find security, but it required years of labor under a master before one could become a skilled journeyman or, at last, a master with a shop of one's own. Children, too, worked early. Boys ran errands, carried wood, or served in shops. Girls spun thread, helped in kitchens, or learned the ways of household management. Education was rare, reserved for the church or the wealthy. Most grew up never learning to read. Their knowledge passed through spoken word, tradition, and craft. Entertainment existed, though it was woven into survival. Fairs brought music, dancing, and bright cloth banners, but also risk. Pickpockets thrived in crowds, and quarrels could turn violent. Drinking ale in the tavern was a common joy, where stories were shared by firelight, yet drunken brawls were just as common. In this fragile rhythm of life, every day was a test. Could you find enough to eat? Could you avoid disease? Could you sell your wares before hunger forced you to beg? For the medieval townsfolk, these questions were ordinary, woven into the fabric of existence. But for you, accustomed to comfort, hygiene, and safety, this world would feel overwhelming. The smells, the noise, the uncertainty. It would be hard to last even one day among the mud, the markets, and the fragile heartbeat of survival. Imagine the gray rhythm of daily toil suddenly giving way to color, music, and laughter. Festivals in the Middle Ages were rare jewels, breaks from endless labor and hunger. For peasants, they were not luxuries but lifelines, a reminder that joy could bloom even in a hard world. The church calendar shaped most of these celebrations. Feasts of saints, Easter, Christmas, and harvest festivals marked the year with bursts of festivity. Bells rang from church towers, their echoes carrying across fields and towns, calling all to gather. In the village square, wooden stages rose, decorated with garlands of flowers or greenery. Minstrels strummed lutes, fiddlers played, and drums beat a rhythm that stirred even weary bodies to dance. Jugglers tossed bright balls, acrobats twisted in the air, and storytellers wove tales of saints, heroes, or faraway lands. For one day, bread was sweeter, ale flowed more freely, and roasted meat perfumed the air. Even the poorest might taste something rare, a cut of pork, honey cakes, or spiced wine. Masks and costumes appeared, with villagers disguising themselves as kings, fools, or beasts, laughter spilling into the night. Religion wove through every celebration. Processions honored saints, with candles carried through winding streets, hymns rising into the evening sky. Plays performed outside cathedrals told sacred stories in vivid color, bringing scripture to life for those who could not read. Faith was inseparable from festivity, each reinforcing the other. Yet shadows lingered even here. Festivals could be unruly. A drunken quarrel might end in blood. Lords sometimes used the gatherings to display power, levying new taxes or announcing decrees. For some, joy was tempered by fear. Would next year's harvest come? Would plague strike before the bells rang again? Still, these fleeting days mattered deeply. They were moments of release, of laughter and music, when even the poorest could glimpse the beauty of life. Imagine yourself standing in that crowd, candlelight flickering against stone walls, the air alive with song. For a heartbeat, hardship melted into celebration. And yet, for you, raised in a world where entertainment is constant and abundance common, such fleeting joy might feel too brief, too fragile. You might struggle to savor it fully, knowing tomorrow brought mud, hunger, and toil once again. For them, though, the memory of the festival was enough to carry them through the darkness that followed. Close your eyes and picture a medieval table. Not the richly decorated banquets of films, but the ordinary fare of a villager. For most people, food was not pleasure, it was survival. Hunger haunted every season, a shadow that never disappeared. Bread formed the foundation of every meal. Dark, heavy loaves made from rye, barley, or oats, sometimes so coarse they ground teeth down over the years. When harvests failed, grain was stretched with beans, acorns, or even ground straw. Each slice was precious, often dipped in thin pottage. Soups of cabbage, peas, or onions boiled in water with perhaps a shred of fat if one was lucky. Meat was rare for peasants, a luxury reserved for festivals or the tables of nobles. Chickens and pigs were too valuable alive, providing eggs, milk, or labor before their meat could be spared. On most days, protein came from beans or lentils, sometimes flavored with herbs gathered from hedgerows. Nobles feasted differently. Their long tables groaned under roasted swans, venison, or whole boars. Platters carried pies spiced with cinnamon or cloves, imported at great cost. Gilded pastries sparkled, while goblets brimmed with rich wines. Yet even here, danger lurked. Food safety was poor, meat often spoiled, and the same hands that sliced venison also touched unclean water. Illness crept in silently, across rich and poor alike. The rhythm of food followed the seasons. In spring, hunger was cruelest. Stored grain dwindled, animals too lean for slaughter, gardens not yet ripe. This was the hungry gap, when children cried through nights and mothers prayed for bread. Summer brought berries, greens, and fish, while autumn offered abundance. Apples, nuts, grains, and the great slaughter of animals before winter. Feasts stood in stark contrast to famine. On holy days or noble weddings, whole communities gathered. Tables sagged under roasted meats, cheeses, and honey cakes. Ale flowed until laughter turned to song. But such abundance was rare, flickering candles in the long night of scarcity. Imagine sitting at a noble feast. The hall echoes with music, dogs weaving under benches, servants carrying trays steaming with roasted goose. You taste spiced wine, rich and warming, yet in your heart you know this is not the world of most. Outside, peasants chew on crusts, their stomachs gnawed by hunger. Food was never certain. A bad harvest, too much rain, or invading armies could mean starvation. Famine struck often, thinning villages, leaving behind silent cottages and fields untended. For you, accustomed to overflowing markets and refrigerators, the constant fear of hunger would be unbearable. And yet, despite it all, medieval people endured. They learned to preserve food with salt, smoke, or vinegar, to forage in forests, to stretch every grain. They made survival into ritual, and gratitude into prayer, finding joy in even the smallest meal. Imagine the sound of tiny footsteps across a dirt floor, the laughter of children echoing faintly in a village lane. Yet childhood as we know it today did not truly exist in the Middle Ages. For most, life began with fragility and ended with responsibility far too soon. The very first struggle was survival. Infant mortality was devastatingly high. Nearly half of all children never lived to see adulthood. A simple fever, an infected cut, or the cold of winter could take a life within days. Mothers, often themselves weakened by hunger or disease, held their newborns with hope shadowed by fear. For those who lived past the dangerous first years, childhood was brief. By the age of 5 or 6, children worked alongside parents, herding geese, gathering firewood, carrying water, or pulling weeds in the fields. Play existed, yes, wooden dolls, clay marbles, or simple games of chasing, but always alongside the demands of survival. Education depended on status. Noble boys might be taught to read Latin, study scripture, and practice the art of swordplay. Girls of noble birth were often trained in household management, sewing, and courtly manners, sometimes learning to read prayers but rarely much beyond that. For peasants, education was a distant luxury. Most never learned to read or write. Instead, wisdom was passed down through work, stories, and songs. Apprenticeship offered another path. At 12 or 13, a boy might be sent to a craftsman, perhaps a blacksmith, a weaver, or a mason, to serve for years in exchange for food, shelter, and the hope of mastering a trade. The work was grueling, the hours long, Yet for many it was the only step beyond field labor. Adolescence blurred quickly into adulthood. By 14, boys could be soldiers, wielding weapons in the Lord's army. Girls, often before their 15th birthday, were married, managing households, and bearing children of their own. The fragile line between child and adult dissolved in the harsh demands of survival. Religion shaped much of youth. Children learned prayers before they could walk, repeated hymns in church, and grew up in a world where heaven and hell were painted vividly in sermons. Saints' stories became their fairy tales, miracles their bedtime wonder. And yet, amidst hardship there was joy. Festivals lit their eyes with wonder, minstrels filled evenings with song, and a piece of fruit or a honey cake could feel like a treasure. Brothers and sisters played in the fields, chasing geese or carving toys from scraps of wood. Even in such a harsh world, laughter found its way through. For you, raised in a world of schooling, toys, and long years of protected youth, the medieval journey from cradle to adulthood would feel unbearably swift and fragile. Childhood was not a time of innocence. It was a preparation for survival, a race against time, and a test of resilience. And so, in the crackle of firelight, as you imagine the children of that world, let your breath slow. For while their lives were short and often harsh, their strength and endurance remind us of the fragility of our own comforts. Close your eyes and listen to the crackle of the fire. Imagine a village at night, its narrow lanes cloaked in silence, only the hoot of an owl breaking the dark. In the medieval mind, this was not just nightfall. It was the hour when unseen forces stirred. For people who lived without science, without the certainty of medicine or technology, the world felt alive with hidden powers. A rustle in the hedges could be spirits. A shadow on the wall might be an omen. Every strange sickness, every failed harvest, every sudden death seemed to hint at forces beyond human control. Magic and religion overlapped in tangled ways. The church condemned sorcery, calling it the devil's work. Yet ordinary villagers clung to charms, prayers, and rituals to guard themselves. A sprig of herbs tied above the door, a whispered blessing before planting seeds, a carved cross hung around the neck. These were shields against an uncertain world. Witches were both feared and needed. A village healer might know which roots soothed fevers, which leaves stopped bleeding, which chants eased childbirth pains. To some, she was a wise woman. To others, she was a danger. Her knowledge too close to forbidden magic. Whispers could turn to accusations, and accusations to trials that ended in fire or water. Spirits were thought to linger. The souls of the restless dead, unable to find peace, were believed to wander roads at night. Ghostly processions called wild hunts were feared across Europe, phantom riders sweeping through the sky, a warning of death to come. Villagers barred their doors and prayed the hunters would pass them by. The stars themselves held power. Astrologers mapped the heavens, claiming that the fate of kings and peasants alike was written in the movement of planets. Nobles consulted them before battles, while villagers looked for signs in the moon. The unseen sky became both a clock and a prophecy. And then there were relics and miracles. A bone said to belong to a saint, a fragment of cloth from the Holy Land, a vial of blood that never dried. Pilgrims traveled for days or weeks to touch them, believing they carried divine protection. Whether real or imagined, these relics bound belief and mystery into daily life. For you, used to science and reason, the medieval unseen world would be disorienting, even frightening. Imagine living each day convinced that invisible forces shaped your fate, that a neighbor's ill will might curse your crops, or that a comet in the sky foretold your death. Yet for medieval people, these beliefs gave meaning, a way to explain the unexplainable, and comfort in a world where so little was certain. The unseen was not just fear, it was also hope. Magic, prayers, and rituals all wove together to help them endure the darkness. So as you drift deeper into rest, picture that medieval night. The flicker of candlelight, the whispered prayers, the protective charm tucked beneath a pillow. For them, sleep itself was an act of faith, a trust that morning would come. Not every hour in the Middle Ages was filled with hunger, toil, or fear. For even in the harshest times, people sought escape, moments to laugh, to sing, to forget the weight of their world. Entertainment was not a luxury, but a survival of the spirit. Performing arts, storytellers, and minstrels. Imagine the fire crackling in the great hall, shadows dancing on stone walls. Into this space steps the minstrel, carrying a lute or harp. With song and rhyme, he weaves tales of love, betrayal, and distant heroes. Storytellers spoke of King Arthur, enchanted forests, and miracles that defied reason. For a night, listeners were transported from their cold, drafty world into realms of wonder. Musical notes, music of the people. Simple flutes, drums, bagpipes, and fiddles filled village nights with sound. Dances, circle steps, stamping feet, were as old as memory itself. Children laughed, lovers stole glances, and old men tapped their canes to the rhythm. In those moments, joy became rebellion against suffering. Person juggling fools and jugglers. At fairs and noble courts, jesters capered in bright motley clothes, bells jingling as they tumbled and mocked lords to their faces. Their humor was sharp, sometimes dangerous, but it was tolerated because it broke the silence of power. Jugglers and acrobats amazed peasants with tricks that seemed like sorcery. Fire festive gatherings. In villages, during harvest or holy days, entire communities came together. Bonfires lit the night, ale flowed, and songs rose into the dark. The laughter of children running through fields mixed with the chants of dancers spinning in circles. For a brief time, all burdens fell away. Open book the weight of story. But laughter carried more than joy. Storytelling was a way to teach, warn, and remember. A fable could warn of greed. A tale could remind a village of saints' miracles. And some stories, dark and whispered, kept fear alive, binding the community to faith, to tradition, to survival. And so, though the medieval world was full of hardship, the sound of laughter, the strum of a harp, and the spark of a story offered something beyond bread. A reminder that even in darkness, humans crave light. Life in the Middle Ages was built upon work, endless, grinding, often backbreaking labor. Yet within this world of sweat and toil, there was also craft, pride, and dignity. For in their hands, people shaped not only survival but beauty, purpose, and legacy. Hammer the blacksmith's forge. Step into a smoky workshop, where sparks leap like fireflies from the anvil. The blacksmith hammers red-hot iron into tools, horseshoes, weapons, and nails. Every ring of metal carries the weight of survival. The farmer's plow, the knight's sword, the villager's lock. His labor was both ordinary and sacred, binding communities together. The carpenter and mason. The carpenter shaped wood into carts, wheels, and homes. The mason raised cathedrals from stone, their towers piercing the sky. Their work demanded patience, skill, and knowledge passed through generations. These were not nameless hands. They were the architects of a world still standing centuries later. Thread the weaver and spinner. Inside cottages, women spun flax and wool into thread, weaving cloth on wooden looms. The rhythm of the shuttle was the heartbeat of the home. Every garment, every blanket meant survival through winter's chill. And sometimes, with a little color or embroidery, beauty emerged from necessity. Bread the baker, the brewer, the miller. The miller ground grain, the baker turned it into bread, the staff of life. The brewer transformed barley into ale, safer to drink than much of the water. These crafts were humble, yet they were life itself. Without them no feast, no survival, no tomorrow. Hammer and pick guilds and pride of craft. In towns, skilled workers formed guilds, brotherhoods of labor that protected secrets of trade, upheld standards, and gave dignity to work. A young apprentice would serve a master for years before becoming a journeyman, and only then, perhaps, a master himself. Craft was not merely labor. It was identity. sheaf of rice the toil of the fields. Most, of course, were peasants, bending under sun and rain, turning soil, planting seed, harvesting grain. Their work was endless, their reward small, yet their labor fed kings, bishops, and cities. Without them, no castle wall would stand, no cathedral would rise. Sparkles the soul of work. Though medieval life was marked by hardship, there was also a quiet pride. In the iron that held a door, in the bread warm from the oven, in the cloth that kept a child warm. Every craft was survival, but also a statement. We endure, we create, we live. Knowledge in the Middle Ages was fragile, like a flickering candle in a storm. A single gust of war, plague, or superstition could snuff it out. And yet, against all odds, minds across Europe kept seeking, questioning, and recording the mysteries of the world. Scroll monks and manuscripts. In quiet monasteries, monks bent over parchment by candlelight, copying ancient texts line by line. Greek philosophy, Roman law, herbal remedies, preserved in ink, hidden in libraries behind thick stone walls. Their pens carried forward wisdom that might otherwise have vanished forever. Balance scale alchemy and the search for transformation. Not all knowledge was practical. In smoky chambers, alchemists worked at furnaces and glass vessels, searching for the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, or the ability to turn lead into gold. Though their goals were elusive, their experiments planted seeds of chemistry and medicine that would blossom centuries later. Globe showing Europe-Africa medieval universities. By the 12th century, knowledge began to gather in great centers. Paris, Bologna, Oxford. Students, wrapped in rough cloaks, crowded into halls to hear lectures on law, theology, and philosophy. Books were rare, chained to desks, precious as jewels. To study was not a right, but a privilege reserved for the few. Herbal healers and practical science. Outside the universities, healers and herbalists worked with roots, leaves, and observation. They watched the skies to predict the weather, studied the stars for guidance, and used trial and error to ease suffering. Their science was mixed with superstition, but it kept villages alive. Sparkles the conflict of faith and reason. Science was never free of tension. The Church watched closely, for some questions threatened doctrine. Scholars like Roger Bacon or Thomas Aquinas sought a balance, reason and faith, logic and belief. Yet whispers of curiosity often met the shadow of fear. Telescope the legacy of curiosity. Even within these constraints, medieval thinkers asked, how do stars move? What is the nature of the soul? How can sickness be healed? The answers were incomplete, but the questions endured. Candle, the fragile flame of wisdom. To live in medieval times was to live in uncertainty. But amid superstition and fear, knowledge survived, protected by scribes, nurtured by scholars, whispered by healers. A fragile flame, passed hand to hand, waiting for a future when it would blaze into light. The weight of a crown. To wear a crown in the Middle Ages was not a life of endless glory, but a burden heavier than armor. A king might sit upon a throne carved from oak, clothed in silk and surrounded by guards, but behind the glittering surface lay sleepless nights, endless intrigues, and the fear that power could slip away at any moment. Crossed swords rule by sword and seal. Kings ruled through force as much as law. Their power depended on loyal knights, ambitious nobles, and fragile alliances sealed with marriages. A careless word, a failed harvest, or a lost battle could spark rebellion. Castles and banners proclaimed their might, yet one betrayal could bring it all crashing down. Scroll the strain of politics. Every day was filled with petitions and disputes. A farmer begging for protection, a baron demanding more land, a bishop warning of spiritual doom. A ruler had to balance church and state, war and peace, punishment and mercy. To fail meant unrest, and unrest meant blood. Crystal ball, the fragility of legacy. Many kings dreamed of leaving behind empires, yet few succeeded. Dynasties fell as quickly as they rose. A plague might carry off an heir, a scheming rival might seize the throne, or the loyalty of soldiers might falter in the night. Even a mighty king was never safe. Poison in a goblet, daggers in the dark, whispers in the court could end a reign. Church crowned by God, judged by men. Kings were anointed with holy oil, crowned beneath cathedral arches, their rule declared divine. Yet peasants saw their taxes rise, soldiers bled on foreign soil, and nobles plotted behind tapestries. A king might be chosen by heaven, but his fate was written by men's hands. Candle, the lonely throne. To be king was to be surrounded by people, yet deeply alone. Every smile could hide ambition, every ally could one day be an enemy. Even in feasts of gold and silver, the crown pressed heavy, a reminder that power was not freedom, but chains of another kind. Sparkles, the fragile crown. The medieval crown glittered, yes, but it was never secure. It slipped easily from one head to another, carried away by war, politics, or time itself. Behind the pageantry was a simple truth. Kingship was as fragile as life itself, and those who wore the crown bore its weight until the end. Sheaf of rice, the backbone of the age. Peasants were the foundation upon which the medieval world rested. From dawn until dusk, their hands turned the soil, their backs bent beneath endless toil. Without them, there was no bread on the noble's table, no grain for the monastery, no taxes for the king. They lived humbly, worked relentlessly, and endured silently, bred the poverty of the fields. Most peasants lived in small, thatched huts of mud and timber. One smoky room might shelter an entire family. Parents, children, even animals to share warmth in the bitter winter nights. Meals were simple. Coarse bread, thin pottage, a little cheese. Rarely did meat cross their lips, except on festival days. Hunger was a constant shadow, and famine a familiar terror. Hammer and wrench bound to the land. Many peasants were serfs, tied to the land they worked. They could not leave without their lord's permission, and part of their harvest was owed in rent. Labor was demanded, taxes collected, and freedom was a distant dream. Yet within those narrow limits, families carved out lives, raising children, tending animals, and passing down traditions. Crescent moon, small joys amid hardship. Despite the poverty, life was not without warmth. Around the hearth, stories were told, songs were sung, and laughter echoed. Children played in the fields, chasing geese or rolling hoops. Neighbors shared bread in times of need, and festivals brought bursts of color into gray lives. Community was their greatest wealth. Candle, resilience in the face of struggle. Storms might destroy crops, lords might demand more than they could give, yet peasants endured. They knew the rhythm of the earth, the turning of seasons, and the patience of waiting for harvest. Their resilience was quiet, uncelebrated, but it sustained kingdoms and built civilizations. Sparkles, the strength of the forgotten. When we think of the Middle Ages, we imagine knights and kings, castles and crowns. But it was the peasants, the nameless, the poor, the unseen, who carried the true weight of history. Their strength lay not in swords or wealth, but in survival itself. Day after day, year after year, they endured. And in that endurance, they shaped the medieval world. The silent keepers of wisdom. In an age when most of the world could not read or write, monasteries stood as islands of knowledge. Behind thick stone walls, monks devoted their lives not only to prayer but also to preserving the wisdom of ages past. By the glow of flickering candles, they copied ancient texts by hand, their quills scratching across parchment, ensuring that knowledge survived the storms of time. Castle, the scriptorium. Step into the scriptorium, where silence was sacred, broken only by the rustle of parchment and the occasional cough in the cold air. Monks bent over desks, their eyes straining in dim light, carefully illuminating manuscripts with colors ground from minerals and gold leaf that shimmered like sunlight on the page. Each book could take years to complete, but in those pages, the voices of Aristotle, Galen, and the Church Fathers lived on. Open book learning in sacred halls. For many, the monastery was the only school. Boys with potential were sent to learn Latin, scripture, and the order of chants. Some would become priests, others scribes, and a rare few, scholars. Knowledge was tightly bound to faith, for to study the world was seen as a way of understanding God's creation. Yet curiosity often reached further, into medicine, astronomy, even the mysteries of the natural world. Bell guardians of memory. When wars raged and kingdoms fell, when plague darkened villages and famine emptied fields, the monasteries endured. Their libraries became vaults of memory, keeping alive the stories, laws, and discoveries that might otherwise have been lost forever. In their quiet labor, monks became bridges between the ancient world and the modern age yet to come. Crescent moon, a legacy of light. Imagine a single candle burning in a vast darkness. That was the work of the monasteries. Though small, though fragile, it was enough to guide the world through centuries of uncertainty. Without them, much of what we know today would have slipped into silence. Their devotion was not only to faith but to the fragile flame of knowledge, and it is that flame that still warms us now. The dream in stone. Close your eyes and imagine walking into a vast medieval cathedral. The air is cool, touched by the scent of incense and old stone. Above you, arches rise like the arms of giants, lifting the gaze toward heaven. Every stone was laid by hand, carved by craftsmen who would never see the work completed, for such cathedrals often took generations to finish. The mason's craft. The masons, cloaked in dust and sweat, were the unseen poets of architecture. They cut blocks of limestone, raised scaffolds of timber, and balanced their lives on fragile planks high above the ground. With chisels and hammers, they gave shape to flying buttresses, gargoyles, and delicate tracery that seemed impossibly light. Yet behind the beauty was strength, designed to endure centuries. Rainbow light through glass. Step closer, and you will see the stained glass windows, glowing like jewels. Sunlight poured through crimson, sapphire, and emerald panes, painting the stone floor with colors that danced like living fire. To the illiterate faithful, these windows were books of light, telling stories of saints, martyrs, and miracles. Each image whispered lessons, not through words, but through the quiet brilliance of color. Bell, the living heart of towns. Cathedrals were more than churches. They were the beating heart of towns. Bells rang across valleys, calling the faithful to prayer, marking the hours and warning of danger. Markets gathered outside their doors. Pilgrims traveled for miles to see relics housed within, bringing with them stories, songs, and trade. In their shadows, life unfolded. Milky Way stone that reached for the stars. Medieval architecture was a kind of prayer made solid. Every arch, every tower, every spire was an offering to the heavens, as though stone itself longed to rise toward the divine. Even today, when you stand within one of those vast halls, you feel the hush, the weight of centuries, the echo of chants, and the silent faith of countless souls. To live in the Middle Ages was to live under the constant shadow of death. Life was fragile, uncertain, and often brutally short. The rhythm of survival was always interrupted by sickness, war, or famine, and the grave was never far from sight. Coffin, the inevitability of death. Infant mortality was high, and many women did not survive childbirth. A fever, a wound, or spoiled food could end a life within days. Death was not hidden away. It was part of the village square, the battlefield, the home itself. Children grew up watching burials and funerals as part of daily existence. Skull and crossbones, the Black Death. In the 14th century, the greatest horror of all descended upon Europe, the plague. It spread silently, carried by fleas on rats, crossing towns and kingdoms with terrifying speed. Black swellings, fever, delirium. Entire families were wiped out in days. Churches filled with corpses. Carts carried away the dead by the hundreds. For many, it felt like the end of the world. Church faith and fear. Some saw the plague as God's punishment, and turned to prayer, processions, or self-punishment to seek forgiveness. Others turned to superstition, amulets, charms, or strange rituals. Few understood the true cause, and so fear spread faster than the sickness itself. Cross swords, death in battle. War too was relentless. Knights might fall on muddy fields, their armor too heavy to rise again. Archers and peasants alike perished in conflicts they barely understood, leaving widows and orphans behind. Death was not heroic. It was muddy, painful, and often forgotten. Rituals of the grave. And yet, there was dignity in mourning. Bells tolled for the dead. Candles burned in chapels. Prayers rose for the souls of the departed. Graveyards filled with wooden crosses and simple stones, while nobles were laid to rest in grand tombs beneath cathedrals. Death divided rich and poor, yet united them in its certainty. Candle, the shadow that shaped life. Because death was always near, life itself was precious. A loaf of bread, a warm fire, the laughter of children. Small joys carried immense weight. To dance, to sing, to share a feast was to defy the darkness, if only for a moment. Sparkles, the ever-present reminder. In medieval times, the phrase memento mori, remember you must die, was not philosophy but reality. To survive even one more day was a gift. And so, the people endured, with resilience born from the knowledge that every dawn might be their last.